Welcome everybody. How are you doing today? It's very nice to have you here. And today I wanted to speak a little bit more about our upcoming 3-week program that begins on June 11th. For freedom, don't believe anything. Addressing the tendencies that we are so familiar with that we believe they are us, they are who we are. And this program is just a beginning of a series of programs that are going to happen over the summer and fall. And one of the themes, there are many themes I want to address in this program. I want to go a little deeper, a little more individual in looking at addressing of some of these tendencies. And one of the areas I want to speak about is the difference, or recognizing the difference between the movement from the past and the movement that arises in the present. And that's a very powerful distinction, a very powerful discrimination. However, it can also, if the mind gets a hold of it, if you start thinking about it, it can also create a lot of misunderstanding, because we try to use the intellect, to understand what does it mean, movement from the past, movement from the present. We try to use the intellect to look, is this the movement from the past? Is this the movement from the present? That can create a lot of confusion. And so I really want to simplify that. When I say the difference between movement from the past and movement from the present, I mean we really have to begin by recognizing the difference between past and present. It's a very powerful discrimination, right? And remember, when I use that word discrimination, I don't mean judgment, right? It's very different. Discrimination, which means to see, to recognize, to become aware of, this is the past, this is the present. And let's take an example, If, for example, in the past, long ago past, not so long ago past, you experience some issues around abandonment, physical, mental, emotional abandonment. Maybe it was a one-time situation, maybe it happened many times in different ways. And in response to that, you have developed some type of strategy of how to deal with that. And when I say strategy, again, there is no judgment here, right? Because, that strategy was part of your ability to survive in a moment or in the past. So there's no judgment of that. But that strategy, some people just go into shock, some people just go into freeze, some people go into, different types of responses. Like most of the time, the response is all or nothing. We can either do something or we can do nothing at all. They are the deeper physiological responses, like, for example, the fear, the shock, the, shutting down, the rejection, right? And so let's say that happened a long time ago in the past. And let's say that in a moment, a situation is arising in your life that looks like, sounds like, feels like abandonment. And so in that moment, chances are that the response that is going to arise is going to be based on our experience in the past. So that means that instead having the capacity to meet whatever is happening right now in the moment, the response that is going to arise is going to be based on our past. That's conditioning, right? Everything is conditioning, but in that sense, I mean conditioning as something that stops us from being present. So that response that is going to arise is going to be based on our past. So we don't really have a chance in the moment to see what the response could be right now, because the response that arises is so strong, it's so, it's familiar, it's conditioned. We feel that's how it is, that's how we are, that's what it is, right? And so to begin to, dismantle this, to begin to sit with this, we would need to recognize it first for what it is. We would need to acknowledge that that response, it's not a judgment. This is not about, is it right, is it wrong, is it supposed to be here or not? It's just a recognition. That response is based on circumstances that happened in the past. And with that recognition, that opens a possibility to be present, right? That opens the possibility to see that response, to even allow it to be present to it, and yet not act on that, not move on that, not follow that, but to give yourself an opportunity to be present to what is, to be present to what arises in your experience, first of all. And then eventually also to be present to what is actually going on in that situation right now. Because, the surprising part is like, we don't know. This is an unknown because it's new, right? This is an unknown. When we are willing to sit, when we are willing to be present, when we are willing, first of all, to recognize the past for what it is, and then actually allow ourselves to be here. There may be a surprising response, for sure, a response that we don't know, right? We just don't know, right? It may be similar to what you have experienced in the past. It may be completely different, right? Because we don't know, because it comes from the moment, right? And for us, first of all, we would need to be here in the moment, right? And not just run with that, response, that tendency from the past, right? To be able to recognize that. It's very, very powerful, right? And when I speak about freedom, I often say freedom means a true independence from the past. True independence from the past. That's the meaning of it, right? True independence from the past. When past arises, a willingness to recognize it for what it is, a willingness, ability to recognize it, and then a willingness, ability to be present to what is. And then see what arises in a moment. What is the movement that is actually here? Is there any movement at all, right? Or what kind of movement is here? And it's so powerful, because when we talk about abandonment, that's an example, right? Then we also, the other side of it is independence, and how much of our sense of independence is based on the past, in which it seemed like that the only way to be independent is to move away from something rather than be present, right? Very, very powerful, because that way we can begin to dismantle, so to speak. We can begin to open up to a different possibility, dismantle the past, allow the past to come to rest. Where the only, for example, the only experience of independence is to move away from everything, right? So very, very interesting. So I'm very much looking forward to, working with you in this deeper way of looking, really addressing these things more clearly, more factually, actually. And if you are enjoying these videos, please subscribe, please like. It turns out liking it, most of all, really stimulates the YouTube algorithm, which we need for this to be more available for others. And also, of course, your comments, we love and appreciate. I love and appreciate your comments. It gives me a nice sense of interaction with you. So please comment, and thank you for all your comments so far. And I'm looking forward to meeting you very soon.